Okay, so anyway, moving along. Verse 24. Therefore, as the church is subject unto Christ, so let the wives be to their own husbands in everything. So that pretty much just confirms, everything I just talked about. In all things, not just some things, everything. Submit to your husband in everything. Every single thing. Because this shows your true submission and faith and trust in the Lord through your husband. You have to remember, just like the Bible is telling us right now, if Christ is the head of the church, your husband is a part of the church, but you're the church as well, then your husband is the head of you. So if you trust the God and your husband, it's just trusting in God's sovereignty, period. So you should be able to submit yourself to your husband in everything, all things, because it's just like being submitted to Christ. You wouldn't dare tell the Lord that he's not doing something right, so don't do it with your husband. You wouldn't dare tell the Lord that he's wrong, so don't do it with your husband. You wouldn't dare cop an attitude with the Lord, so why would you do it with your husband? When God is clearly telling you, or Jesus is clearly telling us, that he's comparing himself to that man. The same dominion that God has over you in the spirit is the same dominion that God has given this man over you in the natural. So if you wouldn't do it to God, in other words, don't do it to your husband. There's consequences. Verse 25, husbands. Now it's for you, husbands. Love your wives even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it, that he might sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of water by the word, that he might present it to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that it should be holy and without blemish. So ought men to love their wives as their own bodies. He that loveth his wife loves himself. Not as deep, because God actually detailed how strong and passionately he wants the husband to love his wife, and he compares it to what Jesus did for his wife, his spiritual wife. He says how Christ denied himself or gave himself up for a sacrifice, that he might sanctify and cleanse his wife with the washing of water by the word, that he might present his wife to himself as a glorious wife, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that it should be holy and without blemish. I think what this shows, clearly your husband cannot do all of that for you, only the Lord. But I think what it shows is how much of himself that Jesus actually gives to us as his spiritual wife, by even going as far as to sacrificing himself for us, so that he can be patient enough to cleanse us with his word. And so it's mostly what these verses are talking about when it talks about not having spot, wrinkle, or blemish. It shows Christ's patience with us. So he wants you to be patient with your wife, because sanctification is a process. So yeah, the Lord, there's a lot of consideration that goes into loving your wife, patience that goes into loving your wife, and understanding her and being there for her needs and coping with her. Jesus does every single one of these things, And this is a powerful revelation in itself, because right now verse 27 is talking about sanctification when he says not having spot, wrinkle, or blemish. And I just found out that in Greek, a marriage actually means sanctification. So and I want to touch on this. Going back to verse 25, where he says, husband, love your wives even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it. What men don't like to accept is that they have a standard given to them by their boss, who is Jesus Christ, on how to love their wife. Men don't like to have standards, because when we hold them to those standards, they want to complain about it. The Lord just told you that you have to love me the way he loves me. They don't like that, because what that causes them to do is they have to sacrifice their own personal feelings now. So the same way that, and it goes hand in hand, because the wife, we have to sacrifice our personal feelings to submit to you. So you should love us the same way God tells us to love you and to honor you. So honor us by sacrificing your personal feelings and your personal beliefs and your personal this and that. Sacrifice your own selfishness to love me the way God says you should love me, which is self-denial, patience, taking my feelings into consideration. If you know that something is going to hurt me, don't ever dare do it. I need to touch on that, because things I've witnessed personally When it comes to married men, married Christian men, things I've seen personally, I've heard some that are very, controlling with their wives. That's not the spirit of Christ. There's a difference between being authoritative and having a position of leadership and controlling someone. You may be in control through the Holy Spirit, but what is the fruit of the Holy Spirit? Love, patience, gentleness, all the good things. That's a woman that'll make her want to submit to you. So Jezebel can come into the man too. That nasty, domineering, controlling spirit, that's not of God. If a man has that, that's a Jezebel spirit. That's demonic. If your husband is telling you to get on the ground and bark like a dog, and he's feeding you what you cooked for him in a doggy bowl, you need to pray about that. That's not submission. That's not the love of Christ. That's him abusing his authority. He knows that God has placed you under his care. So he's doing those things because he knows that he can do it. He's abusing his authority. You need to go to his boss and you need to fast and pray and tell on him. Do not ever take matters into your own hands to divorce the man. God did not instruct no Christian woman to divorce her husband. That is a lie from the pit